I couldn't possibly work in the house, especially when there used to be a lot of children around, and even when there aren't children, there are vacuum cleaners and people bustling about. No, I always write in this little hut. I always have. It is absolutely quiet up here. It may not be pretty or tidy, and it certainly hasn't been cleaned, and the floor hasn't been swept for 5 years at least. So it's full of everything. The only thing I did remove about 2 years ago, we had a goat that got in, and there was some goat droppings on the floor, and I thought, well, I better get a dustpan and sweep those up, and I did. I've taken a great deal of trouble with the actual chair I sit in and the place I put my feet, which is tied to the legs of the chair so I don't shove it away when I press my feet against it. Also in the winter I get into a sleeping bag, and that's right up to my chest. Keep the feet warm, the legs warm. And I always use 6 pencils, and they always have to be sharpened before I start. Finally, you get settled. You get into a sort of nest and get really comfortable. And then you're away. The pencil doesn't very often touch the paper. It's looking and musing and correcting, and then you do a little writing. And in the end, you get something done. But your concentration is fairly intense. You're lost. You're into this world of the story that you happen to be doing. It's terrifically demanding, you know. What do I write? 4.5 hours a day. So a quarter of my waking hours, I am completely immersed in a dotty world of fantasy. And you come out, you know, in a kind of moony state. To my mind, I don't think there's any question that to write a children's book of comparable quality to a fine adult novel or story is more difficult. It's much more difficult to achieve the children's book.
Now, why is that?
Goodness knows.
Do you have to put yourself in their minds? Or is that the wrong way
Yes,
to
you
approach
do.
it?
You see, when you're old enough to and experienced enough to be a competent writer, and you're ready to write a book for children, because a young person can't do it. A child can't do it. By then you become pompous and adult, grown up, and you've lost all your jokiness. You don't have any and so unless you are a kind of undeveloped adult, and you still have an enormous amount of childishness in you, and you giggle at funny stories and jokes and things, I don't think you can do it.
Another of the things one hears about writing for children, and I'd love to know whether it's a myth or not, is that children are very severe critics.
Well, I think they take the books far more seriously than adults. If you read a novel, a goodish novel, you read it, you enjoy it, you put it down. And that's it. Then you go look for the next one. If a child picks up a book and likes it, that's not the end of it, you know. It's read at least 4, 5, and sometimes 15 times, and each time it's got to stand up to that. Sooner or later, some of them finish by knowing them by heart.
A rural vantage point in a small home counties village hasn't restricted Dahl's vision. His wide-ranging interests, from the domestic to the romantic, contribute hugely to the pleasure of reading his books. His stories are like his life, full of offbeat bits of colour and knowledge. He's about as near as you'll find to a 20th century Renaissance man. And inside that head there's a controlled kaleidoscope of riotous imagination, immense literary skill, and most important of all to him, the sheer enjoyment of living.
I love pictures, and I've always collected pictures, even when I couldn't afford to buy them. And now I have some good ones, lovely ones. I love wine, and have several thousand bottles in the cellar. I love furniture, especially 18th century English furniture. I love cultivating plants, especially orchids. A lot of things, you know. I think nearly everyone, every sane and semi-intelligent person likes those sort of things. We have a good snooker table in the house, and we play 3 times a week, and that's played with my local friends. Sunday's a long session. I mean, we start at 6:30, 4 of us, and we finish about 11. And someone brings in some sausages in the middle. That's lovely, snooker. I mean, it is so difficult to play, you see. And what infuriates all of us, and I think especially me, is it's one thing that you cannot get really good at, however hard you try, unless you are supremely gifted, born with it.
That's a pound roll.
You're very successful. Why do you still write? You don't need to, presumably, work anymore.
Oh, I love it. I love it, yes. I don't know what I'd do without having something to work and worry about all day.
You've been telling the children who write to you that you're now 66, you're getting old and you're feeling old, and if I may say so, you're not looking old. You look as if you're going to go on forever.
No, I feel very ancient.
When eventually you do finally have to give up or want to give up, whichever comes first.
When I die.
When you die?
Yeah.
Is there any particular way in which you want to have been remembered? Say by a child who turns into an adult?
Well, you can quote Oscar Wilde and say, when I am gone, I hope it will be said, my sins were scarlet, but my books were red.